whatever you want.
Okay, thank you. This is Pete Beatty conducting an oral history with Vivien Owen of the Tustin Historical Society. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2013, and it is 4:15. Location is Tustin Museum. Please state your name, place, and date of birth.
My name is Vivien Blanche Webb Owen, Mrs. Charles Owen, and I was born November 1st, 1929 in Los Angeles in a Methodist hospital that you can still see from the 5 freeway. It has since been enlarged with another tower or 2 and modernized, and is now a Jewish hospital, but very much a part of Los Angeles history.
We had spoken earlier and you said your father wanted to see the delivery.
Yes, my father had interviewed a number of doctors to find one that would let him be in the delivery room. And so this was a doctor and a hospital where my dad was a part of the delivery room back in 1929.
Unheard of, and for men especially to go in the room.
Right.
And where were your parents? Where were they from?
My dad, Albert Henry Webb III, and he came from Detroit, Michigan with his parents to Hollywood, where uncle, a brother of his mother's, worked in the studios and graduated from Hollywood High in 1924. My mother had been born in Montreal. One of the 4 children was born in Toronto, and the other 2 were born in Los Angeles. And her father was Barzilla Ansley. Barzilla Jack Ansley is one of the sons, and her mother was Blanche Ethel Ansley, and she'd been born in Omaha. My grandfather set up Eastman Kodak franchise businesses. And when they were going businesses, he would sell them and move to another city. My grandmother, he married after he hired her in Omaha, Nebraska, but she was born in Red Oak, Iowa.
Yeah, you certainly know your history. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have a brother that is 2 years younger, Creighton Ansley Webb, and we'll see him next week up at his cabin in Big Bear. My sister was killed in 1989. She was 10 years younger than I am, and Barbara and her husband lost their life in United Airlines 811 when 9 people were pulled out because the luggage door had not been shut properly.
Where did you basically grow up, and tell us a little bit about that as a young child?
Well, my dad and mother both graduated from USC in 1928. Mother had a teaching credential, and my dad was a business major, but he could not get a job, needless to say. So we lived in Santa Monica for a stretch, and then they were able to build a house in the San Fernando Valley, and it was near Moore Park and Laurel Canyon on Bellingham. I went to Carpenter Avenue School, and at that time it was 6 tents, army tents, and there were 6 teachers, and one of them, the 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Garrett, was a teaching principal. So there were no fences, a gully around, and big trees. We played Tarzan and had no asphalt, just some gravel. But on the way home in the spring, about now, you could pick an armload of lupin from the hill. And Carpenter Avenue's still there, but now it's all a building with a fence. And
Well, you graduated from what high school? Were you?
North Hollywood High School in winter 1947.
And where did you meet your husband?
Well, he graduated in summer 1942. However, I did not meet him until after his 5 years in the Navy, back at UCLA, at a fraternity sorority exchange. That's where they line you up to get better acquainted. And I had dated the fellow that was the social chairman, and so he gave me the roughest, toughest Navy man.
What was it like during that time? I mean,
Oh, a
you
ball.
Lady and the war and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I got there when they were all coming back. So it was a ball. I mean, I drank so much beer at a young age. I don't know if I've still got the illegal driver's license, but I've got the beer stein. And we danced in the streets with a barrel of beer and had a ball. In fact, the night we met, March 9th, 1949, we went out to Pico Peaks and drank beer with another couple. And that couple got married the week before we did, came back from their honeymoon to be in our wedding.
Fantastic.
And
like some wonderful times back then.
we had a good time. Good friends still do. Barbara's alive, but Jim passed away.
Now, you moved to Tustin when? I mean, when was that time?
Charlie worked at Hughes Aircraft Company in Culver City. He drove from North Hollywood to Culver City and back every day. And when he had an opportunity to move to Fullerton, Hughes Aircraft moved us in the van and everything down to a new house on the corner of Saugus and Winthrop above 17th Street. In August 1957, our daughter started kindergarten that September, and we're still in the same house, and we have loved it. He's home gardening right now.
Very good. Also, your impression when you first moved to town, I know it's got the old...
Well, it's very similar to the San Fernando Valley. I mean, there were a lot of farms and orchards. I dated a fellow named Bill Holmes, but not the rich one. That's family owned 20 acres of walnuts on Ventura Boulevard. There was one signal at Sepulveda, and it was Ventura, and there was no freeway, and Cahuenga Pass had 2 lanes each way. You know, it was a different world.
How long did it take to get from, let's say, from the valley down to this area in Tustin? Was it a few hours?
One of my mother's sisters lived in Laguna Beach, and my brother and I played poke and punch in the back seat for some very memorable times. And we came through the Cahuenga Pass and then Firestone, as I remember, and down from Firestone at 30 miles an hour. And when we got to the bar, the Melody Bar, at the corner of Laguna Canyon Road, which goes in front of the high school and then went down the canyon, it was like, hurrah, we have come 2/3 of the way. And when we got places, you knew why people stayed for 3 weeks or 3 months, because it was so hard to get any place at 30 miles an hour.
Yeah. Wow. Tell me some stories about your life in Tustin over the years, some of the things that come to your mind that were outstanding about, good and bad actually, about Tustin, things that have happened about your life over the years in Tustin.
In Tustin.
Yes, living in Tustin. So,
Well, we were busy raising kids, and I have always had a rose garden and raised chrysanthemums and lots of the food. We've got a big avocado tree and grapefruit and lemons and oranges, and I've still got a few tangelos that, in fact, I've been picking and eating artichoke. We'll have one tonight. That we have always loved gardening. We paved our side yard and put in a badminton court and things that are, now we've put in more raised gardens. But we had Girl Scouts. I was a Girl Scout leader. When I came home from the first Brownie meeting, they had enough little girls. You know, at that point they were first graders, I think. And they wanted 2 troops. So there was a Northern Brownie troop, and I was supposed to be in the Southern Brownies. And my husband's comment was, where he came from, the Southern Brownies were black. And their name would have been OWENS.
one of the questions I was going to ask, and it's interesting you led me to this, was your involvement in community. Obviously, having a group of girls was quite a feat right there. But what other organizations did you work with over the years?
Well, I did Girl Scouts. I was a leader through junior high school until I went into senior troops. I was the neighborhood chairman and had 75 troops under me. When I retired from that, they replaced me with 3 people. And when we were kind of done with that, my husband by then, of course, had a little league team. And so they have fundraisers and they have a mother's group, and you worked in the candy booth and phoned all the boys and all of that. So we spent our life going to Little League games, eating dinner late, and always, in fact, we were at the first meeting of St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and it was upstairs in the Knights of Pythias Hall. There had been a church with Bishop Kipp that was very, very early, but the Episcopalians were lured to Santa Ana because they drank, and this was a very WCTU town.
Right, town.
And so they went into Santa Ana, and I had been going to the Church of the Messiah prior to the formation of St. Paul's, and we still belong to St. Paul's. I have always done my sorority group, and there was a small group of sorority people because they had lived in Long Beach, and we kind of were a little group, so I did that. After all, Charlie and I met, you know, at an exchange, and we became very active in the Orange County Sierra Club. And he was the first chairman of the Orange County Sierra Club. And Sierra Singles was formed. He was hysterical because he hasn't ever worn a ring. And I didn't know about letting him go to the Sierra Singles without me. Yeah. But we have both climbed well over 200 local mountains in Southern California, over 5,000 feet high. So we have hiked all of the mountains in San Gorgonio and all of them, and most of the Muir Trail.
Was your husband, was he an engineer? What kind of work was he in?
He was in purchasing most of the time and worked up to doing a lot of contracts, traveled with contracts. And one of the most fun trips we ever had was to Istanbul, Turkey. I loved it. That was the most fabulous week, with a dancing bear on the street and getting clothes made where you got measured today, but you didn't do business till you had your sweet tea. And then picking them up tomorrow. I've still got the jacket and could wear it and have you give me a compliment.
So you did some traveling. You and your husband did get out around the world?
Well,
where all did you go?
I usually went back with him on our dollar. But we do have 1, 2, 3 rugs that were handmade in Turkey, and we did travel. And he had been to Egypt, but he liked King Tut here at their display with the signs a lot better. He said Egypt was dirty and it was just all jammed in a big building.
Well, one of the reasons why we're filming is because of your involvement in the mid-1970s around the bicentennial and the forming of the society that we're in this museum and how it all came to be.
Well, the bicentennial committee formed in like 73 or 4, and they sent out a letter to all of the presidents of organizations. So it was a case of finding a liaison. Well, I had always been active in the Tustin Area Women's Club, and that was founded in '58. I joined in 1959 because then they got babysitting, and there were no babysitters anywhere. So we joined, my friend and I. But anyhow, by then I had an office on the board of the Women's Club, and it was kind of filling jobs. I couldn't find anybody, so I said I'll do it myself. I like meetings. So I started going. I never can keep my mouth shut. So I ended up with a job, and I thought, oh good, it's not going to be too hard, because Mary Kelly across the street of the gift shop and the mother of the 12 wanted a wishing you well, and always was wishing you well in Tustin, and the well is there. That was a gift to Tustin. And then Bob Hill had been active from Goodyear Tire Company, which was over at Red Hill and Walnut about, I think. It's one of those along there. And Bob took on the celebration because you got to have a party. So he started the Tustin High School 4th of July fireworks and the show beforehand. And they said to me, well, there's no repository for Tustin history. And so this was kind of what the mission was going to be, on a lasting thing to do for the bicentennial. And it was fine. They had just torn down the bank because it was unsafe, and the city couldn't afford to reinforce it.
What year was that? You kind of guess what year?
Well, yeah, I had known all about all this, yeah. So it went with it all.
Okay, during that whole time period.
Yeah, and that was going on in this stretch of time. And so they gave me the money that was left after Bob Hill's celebration. And as I recall at that time, it was like $250. So I had a treasury. And I had no members, no society, but the city would give us what was being vacated on 3rd Street, that was the library and police department. So we had this little building with all these offices. Well, believe me, I went out and recruited all the friends I could from my gourmet group and from here and there. Friends that went in and tore down those offices so we had a room, and got display cases. This was one, and there's one up in front. And in the course of this time, I was referred to Carol Jordan because she was writing a history of the schools. Well, Carol always loved research, and she never wanted to talk. I went to all the meetings. I gathered people. I solicited help. Carol gathered research on how to set up a museum, how to do the accessions. We went to meetings about all of that. And Carol's friend, Mary Edsel, had a husband that was a native, and her husband had been with the fumigation family and born in Tustin. So even though her background was very different, he approved of her time playing with us in the museum and all of this stuff. So the three of us spent hours, because we had just the three of us to keep the museum open, no pay, and no organization. And that's the reason I said I was the president pro tem, because I had never been elected. There were no members, no constitution, no way to vote. So after a year or so of meetings, Carol and I sat down. I don't think Tony Coco helped us write the Constitution. I remember Carolina, but Tony had been the mayor of Tustin and knew all the politics. He also, I believe at that time, was still working at Hughes, where my husband worked. So we had an overlap. And that was how I was nominated. I think it was Bill Moses that nominated me. But at that time, People of the Year didn't have a constitution either. And so Bill Moses called up my husband and said, "You got to come to this dinner, and by the way, you got to pay." And I was selected as the Tustin Woman of the Year. And needless to say, Mary Kelly was very put out. For years, wouldn't really even talk to me. But I had had more friends on the People of the Year because of Women's Club.
Sure.
And
Community involvement.
I had had community involvement,
Yes.
and so I had Ida McCalla and some of these people that were there speaking for me, and then Maureen Richard, who was always powerful, had been a great buddy of mine in Girl Scouts, and she'd always had the Mariner troop, and half my troop had flown up into the Mariner troop. Maureen and I were always close, so Maureen and a couple of these women simply out-talked the others, and I was selected.
I think it was a good choice. I'm curious, how many, what was the hours that you ran the Historical Society Museum during those days? You said there was only three.
The same Tuesdays and Thursdays.
So you still had that going, the same thing?
Well, we may not have been open as early in the morning, but it was definitely in the afternoon that we'd spend the 3 hours. And Mary disappeared when she and her husband got a divorce. But we had spent so many hours sitting in the museum, I knew how unhappy she was. He took her dinner dancing, I want you to know, every Saturday night. But her complaint was, same group of people, Elks Club, same thing every Saturday. Just take me to a different restaurant, just the two of us, you know.
Wanted to ask also, you've seen obviously a lot of changes, and what do you think were some of the better days and some of the outstanding times during the growth that you've seen, and some of the people perhaps that you've met along the way?
Oh, I don't know how you describe better times. I mean, I did jobs with the schools when we did essays. I did scholarships that we handed out. This year we gave 8 $1,000 scholarships at a women's club. My husband and I were president at the Foothill Parent-Faculty Organization, PFO, and we did it twice because the couple that should have taken it had a business in Tustin, and that was the height of the John Birch Society. So they said, Al said he could not run, he'd have his business ruined, and Charlie worked at Hughes, so it wouldn't affect him. And that was how I got to be very well acquainted with Bill Frick. And it was in that time, oh, I should say, or backtrack, I started substitute teaching when my son was in the 2nd grade. So that was about 1959. And I substituted 30 years in Tustin. And we had a man that did the calling. So he and I had a fabulous rapport, and he knew which days I wanted off, which were Wednesday, for my luncheon group and women's club. And he'd call me on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday and things like that that worked. You know, I had the best of both worlds. So we did all of the I was on the PTA board at Mildred Morrow, on the board at Hughes. We did all of the youth organizations, church, Sierra Club, sorority. I had lots of family parties because Charlie and I liked to entertain. And my folks lived by that time in San Diego, and his folks in the Valley, and we were halfway. So that worked. And Mildred Morrow was closed. I loved the old school and said something about Bob Zylstra riding his motor scooter to school, and it would cause a scandal now if the principal came riding up on a motor scooter like Auntie Em in The Wizard of Oz. And we just had real good times. I should not forget that I spent my year having a fabulous time on the grand jury, and would recommend that to everyone as a fantastic experience. Now it takes a great deal more computer knowledge than I had or have, because the computers weren't there then. You know, it was in the Hall of Administration, they had a whole room with these big room-sized computers. But I loved it because I could drive down under the courthouse and park in my own parking spot, and it said no public parking. And it made you feel real important every day to go up.
On a personal note, what I love about knowing you is that you do have a love for life, and you've enjoyed so much in Tustin, and you've contributed so much to Tustin. It's hard to put on a piece of paper, but if there's one thing that, other than establishing this museum and the Historical Society, what other highlight would you say want to talk about that would be really outstanding in Tustin?
Oh, well, it's all been fun. But after I'd worn out all my friends taking apart the 3rd Street situation and all my ideas for meetings until we had an organization and wrote the Constitution and could elect Bob Hill, the first president, and have it be truly valid, that was how I had already spent 2 or 3 years. I had used all my friends, all my ideas. At Christmas, when we had our first Christmas party, I said, I won't turn in a bill for postage, we'll buy wine. And that was a success. And then I was invited to be the vice president, which is the president-elect for Women's Club. And so I simply tended to step away for a few years there. By then I felt like I had already spent 6 years and they needed new blood.
Sure.
And I feel this organization is as strong as it is now because I did that.
Sure.
That you cannot keep dominating anything and have it continue to grow.
Well, I think the rules that you set up and the bylaws were perfect because it shows the strength of this organization, how it has moved up and gotten larger and more professional. Were you involved with the fire truck at all as far as getting that in the museum?
I was here the day it was moved in. I remember being at the Shoe Man across the street in one of those that's now a restaurant, and the horn went off over on the old building. You know, there was a whole language of bleeps for whether the fire was in the north, south, east, or west, and how bad it was. If it was closer together and louder, it meant it was a really bad fire. But anyhow, he was the fire chief, and and we're in the store picking up shoes or something, and he says, I gotta go, and he just shoves you out the door, locks the door, and goes. And at about that time, my uncle had been fire chief in Emerald Bay in Laguna, and we rode in the fire truck down there that was of this general mood. But they had been using this truck in the Tiller Day parade, and Bill Moses had encouraged the rebirth of Tiller Days and all of that, and it led the parade. But they had so many new recruits, no one could get the thing to shift right. And when you're in a parade, you can't go lurching or bumping. Everybody picks up their chair and runs. So they had a problem, and they gave it to us, and they brought it in over the fountain on ramps before this wall was built.
Yeah, I've heard stories that they brought it through this wall over here, and I
Yes.
wasn't too sure. I know they can't get it out the front door, that's for sure.
No. And that was how they did it. But the city couldn't afford, or the Pythians, we couldn't afford to rent the whole 2
Right. Yeah.
building facilities. It would be nice now to have twice as big a museum, to run all these books in like a lending library of research and some of those things, and to have a social group of old timers that could sit and talk about the past. When we were in Iowa visiting our son at one point, he had an old chair that was an antique, and it had come unglued. So he and my husband were gluing it together, and Charlie says, you need a clamp. Oh, I'll go get one. And they had a historical hardware store where it was like part of the Historical Society, and you could rent tools for a very little money, almost like a lending library.
Well, that's what I love about interviewing you, because you are always coming up with fantastic ideas that can work today as well as when you thought about them, and I think that's a great idea to have tools to preserve and protect some of the stuff that's in this town. I want to thank you for this interview, and as we had said earlier, this is perhaps one of many that we'll do, and depending on how well this turns out, I want to thank you for your time.
Oh, I love talking to you about all of it, and when I do, more comes back, so I'd love to anytime.